There were a lot of heroes that day, and we want to talk more about what really happened in detail. So for that, we're bringing in Mike Regan. He was a former state senator. This was part of his coverage area. You represented these people. And of course, you do have a history with the US Marshal's Fugitive Task Force, so you understand these situations as well. When you listen to what we heard, the details of that day, unfortunately hearing that it was a friendly fire situation, what's your first takeaway?
First of all, it's a sum of all fears for any police officer, any police department for something like this to happen. It's terrible, absolutely terrible. But the one thing I think it's important to remember that this situation was created by the perpetrator, right? These police officers ran into a building not knowing what they were going to see. Very chaotic situation, which is consistent with when these things happen. You know, very chaotic, things changing constantly. I think these police officers performed very well in these adverse circumstances. And unfortunately, something bad happened during a very chaotic time.
Yeah.
But, you know, I can't say enough about their bravery.
The bravery is obviously unmatched, but we want to get into some of these details. As a layman, when I hear that they had both sides of this corridor right outside the ICU on both walls covered, and the person's coming through the middle, it almost seems inevitable that some of the shots are going to go across and then put some of the other people in danger. Is that how it sounds to you, who knows a little bit more about this?
Well, look, I think at first blush, maybe yes,
Yeah.
but I think that, you know, we weren't there.
Yeah.
We didn't see what happened, and the way it was described can be different than the way it really was, so I'm not going to judge there. But I think that these guys were acting on changing information. They were positioning themselves in different spots, trying to get an advantage, and, you know, trying to do the right thing. Maybe sometimes things go wrong.
And it's got to talk about having a hostage in the situation.
Yeah.
Does that just change everything?
Oh my God, everything. I mean, I can't imagine, based on what I heard today, anything that could go wrong was going wrong. And it was just a horrible, high tension situation that any officer wouldn't want to be there, number one. But, you know, it was under great pressure to perform. And I think they did pretty well.
We do know the unfortunate outcome with Officer Duarte getting hit by a bullet that came from one of the other officers there. But let's talk about the accuracy as well. They shot 22 times,
Yeah.
hit the suspect 15 times, didn't hit the hostage once.
Yeah, pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. I think probably that is outstanding. You know, it's just unfortunate the other thing happened, and it's just something you have to consider, you know, with all that was going on.
How difficult is it to work with different departments that you probably didn't train with? This was a mass response from different places, and yet they all had to work together at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, you imagine they ran into the building, and they were teaming up as they were approaching gunfire. You know, I've said this before to you, but running towards gunfire is counterintuitive, right? These guys were running towards gunfire. And I think the fact that they were, well, you know, they're trained pretty consistently. You know, I think they all go through the same basic
At
training.
one point, yes.
Yeah, basic training. But in a situation like that, you're counting on guys to step up and be leaders and come up with a plan on the fly, which is not always easy, but I think they did a pretty good job.
Last thing, it's got to feel terrible when you know that it was maybe your own gun that caused the death of one of your own. What's the kind of treatment and mental help that person, do you think, will be getting in the future? Because it's just unthinkable, even though you know this is part of the game and part of how it goes sometimes. If it's not your fault.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing he needs to understand. I'm sure that officer feels horrible about this. And there'd probably be a lot of counseling and things that go into it. But the one thing that he needs to remember, that this was not his fault. This was the fault of the perpetrator and no one else's fault. He created that situation, and Officer Duarte lost his life, but it was not the police's fault.
Exactly. All right, well, thank you so much for your expertise in this and for stepping up and giving us some time today.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that was Mike Regan, everybody. We're going to get back to the first moments this happened. One of the first reporters there on scene that day was Andrew Klein. And we're going to talk to him about some of his thoughts that day and what we've learned in just the last few hours as well. Andrew Klein coming your way next.